it's Taylor Brough. This is going to be the first of a three-part series that I'm doing about political economy and Marxist theory. In this lecture, we're going to go over Marx's context and some basic terminologies that can help you understand how the capitalism critique, or the Cap K, functions and kind of where it comes from and what its theoretical terms are. In the second one, we'll do a deeper dive into some of those theoretical terms. And then in the third part, I'll talk about how you apply all of that stuff to debate. So first, let's start with Marx, because no theory of political economy can really be said to be complete without thinking about Marx. Karl Marx was a German philosopher who was writing in the mid-1800s in Europe during the Industrial Revolution. And what happened in the Industrial Revolution that was so significant, and why his writings are incredibly significant even today, is that the Industrial Revolution basically means that Europe was starting to make a huge societal transition. And there are some scholars who argue that this societal transition began to happen hundreds of years before Marx started writing. And while that certainly may be true, the Industrial Revolution really accelerated and enacted that transition in a pretty significant way. So we're seeing two significant things happen in the Industrial Revolution that Marx really wanted to talk about. The first is that we're starting to see machines and industry replacing and being integrated into human labor processes. And I'll give a more at length example about that in a second. And the second big transition that's significant is that Europe was starting to really more fully move away. Of course, different parts of Europe did this at different paces, but it was really starting to more fully move away from an agrarian-based rural society where people lived in villages and farmed their own foods. Most of their ties were like close communal or family ties, right? The people that they did business with or bartered with, were often people that they saw regularly and knew. And they were being brought into urban centers in Europe. And we saw huge growths of urban centers because people were now beginning to work at factories. And so that enacted these really huge and reverberating social changes that we continue to live with. And that was what sparked Marx to try to write critically about capitalism. So let's talk about that transition more fully. All right. In an agrarian society, certainly in Europe, perhaps in other places too, but we're talking about Europe right now. In an agrarian society, right, you have like an artisan, a person who, let's say they make pots or something. So, they're making their pot first, they have to get the clay. So they know the right mixture of clay to make the kind of pot that they want to make. So they make their own clay to do it. Then they have to throw the pot on a wheel, right, to actually shape it and give it form. And then they have to fire the pot in a kiln. And then after that, they have to like paint the pot or glaze it or whatever so that it can be used for food consumption, let's say. So they participate in every single step of that labor process. And then, of course, they sell or barter the pot in some kind of local economy. And economy just literally means exchange. Okay, in an industrial society, you don't have just one worker doing that job because you have an assembly line in a factory. So there are some people who in the factory, they engage in the making of the clay or the mixing of it or whatever. And then there are some people who like press the pot out of the mold, that it comes in with the machine. And then after that, there are some people who put the pot in the kiln, maybe others who maintain the kiln at the right firing temperature. And then there are others who glaze the pot, and then still others who sell the pot in market, right? What's significant about this to Marx is if you're an artisan, then you have the skills of every single part of the labor process, because you have to produce your commodity, right? Commodity means like the object of exchange, the thing that you're exchanging for some kind of value, because you've also put value into it. So you have the skills of every single part of that labor process, which means that you can make as many pots as you want. But if you're a worker in an assembly line, you only have one part of the skills to produce a pot. So you couldn't just like quit your factory job and then go and make your own pots, because Marx would say you're alienated from your own labor. You've been de-skilled as a worker. So you've lost in working, you know, your 9 to 5, or I mean, those jobs had terrible hours in the Industrial Revolution. So like your 9 to 11 factory job, you know, you've lost actually all of the skills that it really takes to produce that commodity. And then worse still, the factory is owned, you know, by some capitalist, by the boss. And so if you spend like $10 on the raw material to the clay and the glaze and whatever to get the pot, and then you sell the pot for $20, all of that money goes to the capitalist, right? So in that way, also workers are alienated from their labor, because what gives that $10 of clay any value at all is the fact that workers worked on it. And yet, of course, what we see in the Industrial Revolution is these workers who are alienated from their labor, who are exploited by the boss, because they don't get to have a relationship to every stage of production of the pot, and they have very limited power within the workplace. So this is the context that Marx sought to intervene in. Hope that was helpful, and tune in for part 2.